Hey, everybody, welcome back to the channel that takes you deep inside the San Francisco 49ers. I am your host, Jack Hammer, and it is time to go over the 49ers practice squad. The team also announcing several roster moves, shaking up the roster today. So we're going to get into all that. We're also going to talk about the update on Brock Purdy that we received today from Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. We'll go through the practice squad, as I mentioned. We'll also talk about some of the players not coming back on that practice squad. Some of the players that the 49ers actually lost today as well as a result of not making that original 53-man roster. You know, news breaking early this morning that the 49ers lost three players, two waiver claims. The Arizona Cardinals picking up two of them. The 49ers losing offensive lineman Ilm Manning and Keith Ishmael to the Arizona Cardinals. Both were guys that I think the 49ers were looking to add to their practice squad. I think Manning and uh, Ishmael were both players that the 49ers liked. There's been a lot of discussion about this move and the fact that Ishmael and more importantly, or more to the point, Ilm Manning, there was a lot of people who felt like Ilm Manning should have made the 49ers initial 53-man roster because of the performance that he had during the preseason and training camp. As somebody who watched the entire training camp, as somebody who was there for the preseason games throughout the entire process, I will say I think that the Arizona Cardinals picking up Ilm Manning, adding him directly to their 53-man roster, and the same thing with Keith Ishmael. I think what that does is more than anything, it shows the difference between where the 49ers are currently and where the Arizona Cardinals are. More to the point, it shows how much better the 49ers roster is than the Arizona Cardinals. This isn't to take a shot at any of these guys, but Ilm Manning, he did a really nice job. When you go back and you look at who he's playing against, Ilm Manning's reps were against third stringers. He never made it past the 49ers third string offensive line. Never got to work with the backups. Never got to work with the starters, obviously. And now you have Ilm Manning going out to Arizona, and he is going to be on. Not only is he's a step away from being on the field, although they have one injury, and he is now in the game in a regular season game, whereas with the 49ers, that was never going to be a possibility. And that's part of the reason why they did not add him to their 53-man roster up front. He just wasn't up to that level. There's been some people that have pushed back on the fact that the 49ers kept Nick Zakelj on that roster instead of Ilm Manning. And what I can say is that, yes, Nick Zakelj struggled during the preseason, struggled at times during training camp. The difference between Ilm Manning and Nick Zakelj is that Nick Zakelj, two things. One, Zakelj was a draft pick. That gives him a little bit of a leg up. That's always, as unfair as that might seem, that's always going to be something that plays into it. But more importantly, Nick Zakelj was working with the ones and the twos. Nick Zakelj got into the game, got into practice, when Aaron Banks left. And working with the starting offensive line, he looked just fine. He stepped into that starting offensive line during practice, during training camp, when Aaron Banks went out. He steps in and does a really nice job. And I think you look at Nick Zakelj, and if you take the totality of his training camp, everything that he did, he was the better player than Ilm Manning. And like I said, you can watch the film on Ilm Manning. You can see some really good things from him. He does some things nicely, but it's not going to it's doesn't translate as much over because again he's working against guys who also aren't going to be in the NFL, whereas Nick Zakelj is working against guys that he's going to play against. He's also worked against the 49ers starting offensive line. I think the other thing that works against Ilm Manning here is that Manning sees himself as a tackle. The 49ers, I don't think, were comfortable with him being a tackle long term. I think what they wanted to do was develop him to play inside, to slide down and play guard, maybe even center. So it just didn't work out there. Another player that the 49ers lost to a waiver claim is cornerback DeSean Jamison. Now, this one, of the three that the 49ers lost, this is the one that hurts. The other two, they weren't guys that were really even close to making the 53. They were definitely going to be practice squad additions. Whereas a guy like DeSean Jamison, also an undrafted free agent, but he had a really strong camp, beginning with mini camp all throughout most of training camp. Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch spoke at the podium today. Kyle Shanahan saying that DeSean Jamison started off really good, but kind of tapered off a little bit towards the end. And I would agree there. I think when you look at DeSean Jamison, some really good things to like about him as a cover guy. But he was going to make this roster. If he was going to make the 53, it was going to be made off of his ability to return kicks. And we saw some mistakes from him that we didn't see from Ronnie Bell. Ronnie Bell proved himself as a kick returner, proved himself a little bit more valuable as a receiver. And with Bell and Bell stepping up, even though they don't play the same position, one's a receiver, one's a defensive back, it was Ronnie Bell stepping up, rising to the occasion as a kick returner and as a wide receiver as well, that bumped Jamison off of the roster. Jamison getting signed or claimed off of waivers by the Carolina Panthers. And now all three of those, Il Manning, Keith Ishmael, and DeSean Jamison, they will all go directly to the 45-man rosters, 54-man rosters, 53-man rosters. Come on, Jack, get it together. The 53-man rosters. That's the other part, too. That's why when you look at the 49ers, they didn't have any waiver claims, I think in part because they had a full 53-man roster. They had some moves that they were going to have to make anyway, and I don't think they had the spot anywhere else to make a move. Portola 45 over here making a really good point. I want to pull this one up. This is actually it's a good point in that there's a player who will no longer be with the 49ers. Jason Poe, the Jason Poe experiment, as Portola says, is over. Jason Poe, a player that a lot of people liked coming out last year. He was ended up being an undrafted free agent, a guy that tested off the chart, uber athletic, extremely athletic, but he's just too small to play at the NFL level. We saw the 49ers work with him all last season. We saw the 49ers bring him back and try to step him up into more of a backup role. You know, his first year, he was doing everything with the third team. Maybe stepped in a little bit with the backups during training camp and whatnot. But for the most part, Jason Poe worked mostly with the thirds. And then he got the 49ers kept him around on the practice squad. This year, they asked him to step up. They asked him to show that he was able to be a backup. And it didn't work. And you watch the film of Jason Poe, and there's just so many examples of him not being good with his footwork and his hand placement. It's different things like that. You could really see him struggling. And so Jason Poe does not make the 49ers roster. He does not make the practice squad. Excuse me. We knew for sure he wasn't going to make the 53-man roster, but he doesn't even make the practice squad either. They don't bring him back. Instead, let's go through it. Let's go through the 49ers keeping 16 players of their own, plus they added another player from another team. So, the 49ers went through their cut down. They kept 16. They added one. So in terms of the offensive linemen that they only kept three, excuse me. They kept Alfredo Gutierrez. Alfredo, coming from Mexico, allows the 49ers to keep 17 players because of the NFL's International Player Pathway Program. That's where Gutierrez comes from. And so that means that the 49ers are available to have the international player practice squad exemption. So Alfredo Gutierrez is on the practice squad. However, he is not able to be brought up. He is ineligible to be activated to the 53-man roster, whereas the other 16 players on that are able to be elevated. So in terms of offensive linemen, I just mentioned Jason Poe not on the list. You have Alfredo Gutierrez. You have center guard Corey Luciano. And then you also have offensive tackle Leroy Watson. Like both of these guys, Leroy Watson especially, there was growth in his game from year one to year two. Like I just got done talking about Jason Poe and Watson. There was big time growth from year one to year two. Watson at one point during camp, there was no Trent Williams out there. Jalen Moore gets injured. Leroy Watson steps in, working with the 49ers starting offensive line, and had a really nice day. And Chris Verser was asked shortly after that about Watson and how the progress that he's made. And he was very quick to point out that Watson is early in this process, switching from tight end to the tackle. But there's a lot to like about Watson with his feet, his hands, all those types of things. And he's a guy who we could possibly see in a year or two make it up to the team. So really nice addition there. Farsard saying that Zakel made the roster of DeSean. I don't think so. I think Nick Zakel is a guy who he has multiple things that he can do. And as I mentioned, again, if you just watch the preseason games, if that's all you're basing it on, then I can understand where you might think that Zakel's being on the roster is absurd. Just like how Dusty Gold says that Manning looked good in the preseason. Again, Manning did look good in the preseason, but you also need to understand that Manning was playing with the third string offensive line against third string guys, mostly guys who are going to be on practice squads and other positions. The 49ers weren't going to keep him on the 53-man roster. Their roster is too deep. They weren't going to keep him there. He was a guy that was going to only make this team through the practice squad. So they put him on waivers, hoping that he'd clear and they could sign him back to the practice squad. Instead, the Arizona Cardinals, who quite frankly don't have a good roster, decided that Manning was worth a shot, and they were going to bring him on their 53. So that's why he's where he is. He looked really good against backups, not even backups, against practice squad level players. Now he's going to be a backup. It's a totally different step up. Nick Zakelj, working with the starters, working with the backups. He struggled in preseason, but at the same time, like I said, I was at training camp practices. I watched him step in at left guard in place of Aaron Banks during that last week of training camp, and a seamless transition from one to the other. So, you look at it overall, I think that the 49ers made a good move here. Again, Manning, I understand why everybody liked him. He can play offense. He can play tackle. I don't know about inside. There's some question as whether or not he would want to slide inside, so we'll see. All we saw him play was tackle on both sides, whereas Nick Zakelj, he's played in training camp. Nick Zakelj played both guard positions and center. So just like John Feliciano, he has the ability to play throughout. The other thing is the 49ers didn't want to risk losing Nick Zakelj. They were okay losing Manning, and I just explained why. Nick Zakelj is a guy that the 49ers see as a long-term possibility for this roster, especially with John Feliciano. He's older, right? He's probably only going to be here for one season. It's highly likely that you're going to see John Feliciano on another team other than the 49ers in 2024, and that position will be taken up by Nick Zakelj. Zakelj, has that ability to play all those spots inside. We'll see what happens, but that's the reason why he is here. He also has some ability to play on the edge, but they feel like he's more of an interior offensive lineman, is Nick Zakelj. You look at the offensive lineman, Leroy Watson. Corey Luciano is a similar type of a player. He can play center. He can play guard. So he's a nice fit for that reason. He'll be a good developmental type of center for the 49ers inside. Also on the offensive side of the ball, they kept tight end Troy Fumagalli. Fumagalli is a veteran tight end who I think was close to making this roster. He wasn't that far off. If you go back and you look at last season, there was a lot of shuffling going on amongst the tight ends on this roster. I could see a situation where at some point Fumagalli is actually called up to that active roster. We'll see how that works. Another player, fullback Jack Coletto. There's a lot of people wanting to know what was going to happen to the jackhammer. A lot of people, my buddy Gav out in Wales was very worried that this fullback was going to end up on another roster. The 49ers took the gamble. It paid off. Jack Coletto making it through waivers, making it back to the 49ers. He will be on their practice squad. Makes a lot of sense considering this is a guy who the 49ers now can use this season as development. You go into next year, there's a high likelihood, I think, that this is going to be the last ride for Kyle Juszczyk. So you got Jack Coletto here, and you're able to develop him now and get him around to where they are, where he'll be able to be the starter, possibly even next year. Mark Salah saying Ilm is better than Zakelj was as a rookie. No, I would say the answer to that is probably about the same. They were similar. The difference is that Zakelj improved to the point where they didn't want to risk losing him. Ilm Manning is a decent player, and again, did he look good? Yes. You got to take into account who they're lined up against, and he's not lining up in these preseason games against guys that he's going to line up against on Sundays. Those guys that he was playing against in the preseason are guys that are going to be on practice squad. He was playing against practice squad level players when you saw him on the film, when you watched him in games on TV. Those were practice squad level players that he was going up against. Now, as part of that 53-man roster out in Arizona, if there's an injury, he's stepping in and he's playing against Nick Bosa. And or Clelin Ferrell. That is a mismatch. Il Manning will get beat by top level NFL pass rushers. And I'm not even saying that a guy like Clelin Ferrell is a top level NFL pass rusher, but he would beat him, and you'd beat him bad. Il Manning is a nice player, and I would have been a nice developmental type player. But adding them to your 53-man roster for the 49ers, a team that is expecting to be able to go to the Super Bowl, Il Manning isn't it. I know people like him a lot, but he just wasn't going to be that guy. Uh, wasn't Zakel lining up against the same players during the preseason? No, because Nick Zakel was playing with the backups. He was playing earlier in games. He was stepping in much earlier, whereas you saw Il Manning when Il Manning was stepping in. That was in the second half, the end of game. He wasn't his highlights, all the highlights that you've seen on the various cut-ups and things that you see on Twitter, those are all coming late in games. Those aren't in the second quarter against better competition. They're coming later. And so that's why he's not here. And I understand seeing some things from him. And again, I'm not saying he was bad, but what I'm saying is he wasn't worth a 53-man roster spot. He was worth a practice squad spot. He wasn't worth the 53-man roster spot. The 49ers, feeling that way, took the risk. They lost, and the team that picked him up now has to live with it, because if he struggles, that's on them. And that's why I think, again, I point out that the Arizona Cardinals, there's a reason that he's in Arizona. It's because Arizona's roster sucks. Let's just be realistic. Let me just stop being nice about it. Arizona's roster isn't good. That's why he's there on their roster. If you look at Arizona's roster, there's a reason why they claim the most players out of any team. It's because their roster isn't good. So they're bringing in guys to try to build for the future. I think Arizona's a complete mess, and we saw it beginning last year, and it's going to continue under their new head coach, who I think is a mess as well. So we'll see how that works. Spencer Wagee was not picked up. I didn't see him get signed anywhere in terms of he was not picked up on anybody's 53. I don't think I did not hear his name as somebody who got signed to a practice squad either. East Coast Red and Gold podcast says, "What's up, Jack? Go Niners. Hope you're doing well." So no losses except for Jamison, which is stupid. I agree. I do. The Jamison one is a tough one. I think he was probably one of those last guys that was cut. Marcelino McCurry-Ball is going to be back. He will be with the team. He is one of the names that I hadn't gotten to yet. Marcelino McCurry-Ball. I don't see him on my list as far as players that the 49ers. I don't even see him on the list as far as players that have made the practice squad. Let me double check my notes, but I don't think that Marcelino McCurry-Ball made the cut in that way either. No, he didn't. So no Marcelino McCurry-Ball at all. Didn't make the 53. Doesn't make the practice squad. Marcelino McCurry-Ball, another one of those guys. The 49ers were extremely deep in this position, and he was on their practice squad last year. He might be a guy who just feels like he wants to go somewhere else. Like he feels like he's going to get a better shot on a roster in another location, and that makes sense. He wasn't better than Jalen Graham. He wasn't better than D. Winters. He's not better than Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles. And you start to look at it, especially with Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, and the 4 rookies. The 49ers have a lot of invested in their linebacker room. So a guy like Marcelino McCurry-Ball, one of those fringe type of players, if I was him, I want to go and I want to find a team where I can maybe hook on with. The 49ers are too deep for him, and that just didn't work out. So didn't work out for Marcelino McCurry-Ball here. Looking at the offensive players, like I said, I got through the offensive linemen: Leroy Watson, Corey Luciano, Alfredo Gutierrez, Jack Coletto, and then tight end Troy Fumagalli. The 49ers also have 4 wide receivers on their practice squad. They have Chris Conley, Willie Snead, a pair of veterans, and they have a couple of younger guys, Tay Martin, Isaiah Winstead. And I really like, of this group, I really like the Winstead and Snead signings. I like that Willie Snead. He was in this role last year for the 49ers. He's a veteran. He gets it. He can play special teams at a very good level. He's a good receiver as well. He would be like 5th or 6th on any roster. but he's okay. He fills that out, but his special teams ability pulls him over. I think as far as Willie Snead and Tate Martin, I think Winstead is a better wide receiver than Tate Martin. So if they're younger guys, I like Isaiah Winstead. I think he's a guy that can really develop uh, moving forward. So that's a big piece of it there. Chris Conley also had a nice training camp dealing with that shoulder injury. And this will allow him to kind of work his way back over there. When he's healthy, the Flyers can then possibly pull them up. And it's going to be important early on, especially with the injuries to Danny Gray and Ray McLeod. It's going to be important for some of these guys to step up. I would expect to see Willie Snead active in a game or two early on, and possibly either Martin or Winstead as well. Usually the Flyers don't need 6 receivers on game day. They can usually get by with 5 because they don't usually ever go with more than 3 wide receivers very often. And they can get by with some tight ends and do some other things. They can go into some of their packages and still basically run that same stuff on offense that they want to do. So 4 wide receivers. I really like Winstead and Snead. Tate Martin is coming along, and Chris Conley is a nice veteran addition. Dusty Gold wants to know if there was any update on the health of both the kickers. Well, according to John Lynch, he said John Lynch saying that Moody is coming along. He's making some progress. They're not sure right now where he is in terms of being able to be ready for Pittsburgh. They have some guys coming out. They've already had some kickers in San Francisco for tryouts. They have some more that are going to be coming out for more. So the kicker deal isn't completely settled quite at this point yet. Taylor Broussard mentioning that Marcelino McCrary-Ball signed to the Jets practice squad. That makes sense. Marcelino McCrary-Ball, a guy who performed at a high level last season. The linebackers understand linebackers, so it makes a ton of sense for him to be out there with Robert Saleh. They didn't work together in San Francisco, but that one makes a good amount of sense. Let's look at the defensive side really quick. I want to get through the practice squad players, and we'll look at some of the other roster moves that the Flyers made today. In terms of the defensive side, with roster moves, the 49ers bringing back cornerback Trey Swilling. This is one that isn't surprising. Swilling had a pretty good training camp for the 49ers. I mean, it's clear that he's not a 53-man roster guy in terms of one of their top 4, 5, 6 cornerbacks, but he is one of those guys who you like to continue to develop. They also brought in a player from the Green Bay Packers, the one player that the Flyers signed off of another squad to their practice squad was cornerback Shamar Jean-Charles. He comes to the Packers, according to John Lynch. Jean-Charles from the Packers again, Shamar Jean-Charles, cornerback. Part of the reason the 49ers liked him is this is a guy, according to John Lynch, has inside-outside versatility. They really like that ability. If the guy can play inside in the slot or outside on the boundary, they feel like Jean-Charles can do that. They also feel like this is a guy who has strong special teams ability as well. So he's kind of got all those things that you want in a cornerback that you're bringing onto your practice squad. Has most versatility with multiple positions, inside and out, can help out on special teams. So that's what brings him in. And also, one of the names, and a lot of people thought he would make the 53-man roster, but he didn't, is defensive back Quantrez Knight. Knight, the former UCLA Bruin, didn't make the roster, but he does get brought in here on the practice squad. This is a nice signing for him. I really like Quantrez Knight. I felt like he had a very solid training camp, a very solid player throughout. He was good in the preseason as well. He's a really nice player. So if you have if you have an issue with a guy like Talon Hufanga, who is dealing with some things with his knee right now, that Baker cyst on his knee, which sometimes can linger, those types of things. If they need to have a guy come up, Quantrez Knight can step in and he can play safety for this team. Quantrez Knight can step up and he can play down in the slot. I think when you look at the 49ers roster as a whole, we know that Isaiah Oliver struggled in the preseason. They kept him, I think, in large part because of his guaranteed money, $2.91 million guaranteed at signing. So I think that's why you see Isaiah Oliver on this roster. But I also think, as John Lynch pointed out today, guys like Deommodore Lenoir, he can slide inside, and with Ambry Thomas coming off the bench to play that outside position. I also think when you look at the 49ers secondary, there's a possibility we're going to see them go in kind of a heavy nickel with a guy like Jair Brown um, playing around the line of scrimmage a little bit. Or, if Quantrez Knight is there, it's a Quantrez Knight kind of thing. So the 49ers, I think Quantrez Knight, I agree with Fish and Chips here, is a valuable member on the practice squad, could be elevated to the 53. I don't see him being a guy that's going to be elevated to the 53 and kept there, but I do think he's a guy that can be elevated to the 53 for a game or two here and there, depending on what's going on. John J says, do you have to keep a waiver claim on the 53? If so, for how long? Yeah, so that's the thing. If you put a waiver claim in on a player during the sit down, they automatically go to your 53, and it's grouped throughout the season. If you don't want to keep them on the 53, you have to put them back out on waivers. And again, the waiver claim process starts again. So you claim that guy, you put him on your 53. If you don't want to keep him on your 53, you've got to waive him. You've got to let him go through that whole waiver claim again. The problem for the 49ers in that whole process is they're at the bottom of the waiver claim list because they were in the NFC Championship game. I think they're 29th or 30th on that waiver claim list. So in terms of getting guys off of that, it's going to be tough. And I don't think the 49ers would want to claim them and get them on to their 53. If it doesn't work out with any of these guys that were picked up off of the 49ers practice squad, they'll get waived. They'll go through that process. If they don't get picked up by anybody, then at that point they can get signed to another team's practice squad. So that's the way that it works. Let's see what else we've got. Yeah, there was a lot of fun stuff with Trey Lance this year, hasn't there? But I'll leave that to the comment section to keep up with that. So in terms of the cornerbacks, I mentioned the defensive backs, Trey Swilling, Shamar Jean-Charles from the Packers, and then also defensive back Quantrez Knight. The 49ers also only brought one linebacker back. The linebacker that they bring back is Curtis Robinson. Robinson, a veteran guy that was in this position with the 49ers last year, strong special teams player, a really nice fit. The 49ers now have 7 linebackers on their roster between their 53 and practice squad. There's a likelihood that one of those guys could get traded. Maybe there's a trade in the works for somebody like Demetrius Flannigan-Fowles. Would make sense. And if that was the case, then you could bring up Curtis Robinson. In the meantime, with only one linebacker on the roster, some of those guys that are on the 53 will fill in at linebacker during scout team and those types of things. Along the defensive line, though, the 49ers going top heavy again, all veterans. They didn't bring in very many young guys. They bring in veteran defensive tackle Marlon Davidson, veteran defensive tackle T.Y. McGill. Davidson had a really nice training camp, really nice preseason, showed well, especially in those preseason games. Defensive lineman Alex Barrett as well comes back to the practice squad. Barrett, more of a edge rusher, a little bit undersized edge rusher, but he really looks good off that edge. Also can line up inside at times if they need him to. Again, he's a little undersized in there, but he handles his own. And then they also have T.Y. McGill. McGill, more of a run stuffer, made some big plays last season for the 49ers. He was in this position on their practice squad. They elevated him for some games to the point where he had to be added to the 53. So we'll see what happens there with McGill, with Davidson. They're not going to give up yet on Javon Kinlaw. Obviously, they're not giving up on Javon Hargrave, but they're not giving up on Javon Kinlaw either. So some really good names when you go through this list. Just one more time, I think the 49ers did a good job. Yeah, there's no train. I'm today I'm in a little bit different spot. Today I am outside of a Starbucks, and so what you're hearing is all the cars go by. So it's just crazy noise all the time wherever I am. I can't find a quiet space. Shane Killen Marino says, Jack, this is a debacle. How do you rush away Lance, who you spent 3 first on, but keep Kinlaw and Thomas to develop, keep Oliver, lose Jamison? The roster management is going poorly. Well, okay, this isn't a debacle. First off, Trey Lance is the guy who wasn't going to be the 49ers starter, wasn't going to be the backup. They were going to keep him as a third. He didn't want to be here, so they traded him. And I've been thinking about this quite a bit. Think about this. He wasn't going to be the backup, whatever the reason was. I don't agree with that. But the 49ers had decided he was going to be the third string quarterback on this roster. if he chose to stay. He didn't want to, so they traded him away. The 49ers traded a third string quarterback, a guy that is now with the Dallas Cowboys as their third string quarterback. They traded him for a fourth round pick for a third string quarterback. I think that's an interesting one. Um, nobody thought they were going to get a fourth round pick for Trey Lance. Let's make sure we're just being honest about that. If they were getting a fifth, that was going to be a surprise. So they got a fourth. I don't think that's a debacle. Kinlaw, he's a first round pick. He has some ability. Who are you going to keep over Javon Kinlaw? There's nobody. There is nobody that you were going to bring in that was going to be better that you lost. Let's put it this way. There's nobody that the 49ers lost to another team that was going to make this roster better than Javon Kinlaw. Ambry Thomas is the third best cornerback on this team. That's why he is on the roster. Ambry Thomas is here. He is going to play. If the 49ers decide that they are going to use Diameter Lenore in the slot, that means that Ambry Thomas is going to play, and he's going to play a lot. And I think the 49ers really like him. You know, if you want to talk about Oliver and losing Jamison, this is one that I agree with you on. I agree with you on Oliver and Jamison. None of the rest of it I do, but the reason that you keep Oliver, the only reason that I can see that Oliver makes sense is it doesn't even make sense really. It's all about money with that. $2.91 million guaranteed. They weren't going to save much by getting rid of him. I think the other thing, and John Lynch mentioned this too, is that Oliver has the ability to play a little bit of safety if they need him to play back there. So again, he has a lot of versatility, can do a lot of different things. And you're losing Jamison because Jamison was probably your sixth or seventh best cornerback. He could play inside and outside, but he wasn't going to be a guy who was going to do much for you. Once he got beat out for the returner position by Bell, Jamison's days were numbered. I had him on my 53 mostly because I just like the player that much. But it's not losing him isn't one that I say, wow, that's a big surprise, or I can't believe they kept him on the 53. Even though I had him there, I didn't expect him to be a guy that was going to make a big impact there, if that makes sense. I have a super chat here. I got to hit up Jeremy Price in the super chat. So, what up, Jack? We will have 12 wins this season. Let's go Niner gang. We are witnessing Kyle grow right before our eyes. I think this is a 11 to 12 win team. I think I had them at 12-5 when I did my initial look at their schedule and looking at who I thought the roster was going to be. I think that's right about the number, Jeremy. 12 wins. In terms of Kyle growing up right before our eyes, I don't know. I don't know why you say that Kyle's growing up. I think Kyle's still the same guy that he's always been. There was the press conference after the game on Friday, and he was very he took a lot of the fault for the issues with Trey Lance. And as I listened to him talk through and give his answer to those questions, I didn't buy it. I felt like that was a guy who was saying what people wanted to hear. I think we heard more truth from him today when he was pressed on it again about what's going on. The reason that it didn't work out with Trey Lance is he couldn't stay healthy. And the 49ers gave him opportunities. They weren't going to just hand him the job in 2021. They weren't at that point. They still had Jimmy Garoppolo under contract. Part of the reason they had Jimmy Garoppolo still there was because it was going to cost them so much money to move off of him. And so they stuck with him for 2021, but they tried to push him to they tried to push Trey Lance in there so that Jimmy Garoppolo would have to be the backup. And Trey Lance never stepped in and took the job. And then, they decided that it was that last season, they were going to move off. He had a rough training camp. They stuck with it. They couldn't move Jimmy Garoppolo. They weren't getting the value that they wanted for him, so they brought him back. Maybe some of it. I pushed back on this. I don't know if it's accurate. Maybe the truth is that they decided that they didn't feel strongly in Trey Lance even in 2022, and that's why they brought Jimmy Garoppolo back. I don't know. Those are rumors. I tend to believe that they wanted to move on and they wanted to make it Trey Lance's team, and Lance was going to be the guy for the long run, except for he went down with that injury, and it was only 5 quarters in. I think that's really what it is. So that's it on Lance. In terms of today, what we heard from Kyle Shanahan today, he kept getting pressed on this. And, people want to keep talking about Trey Lance. The media, and I understand asking these questions about Trey Lance. Isn't it odd that this guy only got 4 starts? Isn't it odd that you're moving off of him so early? All these types of things. And I think that's not, he's already given his reasons why. So I can understand to an extent why Kyle Shanahan will get a little short with these answers today. Because here's the thing. It's not odd. It's the only reason it's odd is because Trey Lance was injured so much. If Trey Lance wasn't hurt in 2021, if he hadn't hurt his knee in that game against Arizona, he would have got more than 2 starts as a rookie. If Trey Lance doesn't get injured against the Seattle Seahawks last year, he gets more than 2 starts last year. The whole reason that Trey Lance played so little is because Trey Lance was hurt. I don't understand that. You've got to understand. Trey Lance didn't play because he was hurt. Were they supposed to play him with a broken ankle? Were they supposed to play him with a knee that got ruined? The narrative and this constant discussion about Trey Lance and how the 49ers moved off of him, get real, people. I understand that some of you built your platform off of Trey Lance, but holy shit, the reason that Trey Lance didn't play more is because he was injured. He would have played all 17 games last year if he didn't get injured, unless he really sucked. And I don't think he was going to really suck to the point where he wasn't going to play. I just don't think that was going to happen, because I think he would have found a way to be okay. So I agree 100%. The Trey Lance stuff is clickbait. I don't understand why we need to keep talking about him. He's a Dallas Cowboy now. Yes, the trade for Trey Lance was a disaster. It was probably the worst draft trade in 49ers history. We get it. To keep asking him about it, what does it serve other than for him to act like he did today, and then for everybody to complain about the fact that he didn't just say, well, and go through the same thing that he's told you he's told Trey. Kyle Shanahan has told the process with Trey Lance so many times. I can understand why he would get frustrated today. How many times does he have to tell you the same goddamn thing? Sorry for swearing. Jeremy Price, $4.99, says how he did Jimmy wrong by bringing in Lance. He created controversies. Same with Lance. Don't do Purdy wrong now. Move on and live and die with the kid. Okay, I kind of get you there. Jeremy also saying that PSA, Lance wanted out, and I agree with that too. Lance did want out, right? He did. And he did Jimmy wrong by bringing in Lance. He created controversy. Same with Lance. Yeah, I guess so. Maybe he did. I think that's partly why Jimmy Garoppolo has the gripes that he has, right? 2021 and 2022. 2021 especially was just a weird year with that whole situation at quarterback. That whole season was weird. 2022 was different because it was Lance's team, but it was still weird for Garoppolo in that the 49ers wouldn't let him work out somewhere else. They forced him to practice and work out in Santa Clara. So that kind of created a spectacle on the side field and all that kind of stuff. But then once Garoppolo got in, Garoppolo knew it was one and done. He knew that he was gone after this year. I think that's why when the cameras caught his face against the Denver Broncos and he's yelling, "Your plays suck," right? It's because Jimmy Garoppolo knew he was done. He was done in San Francisco. He had put up with their stuff long enough, and now he was going to do the best that he could. But at the same time, he wasn't going to be. You could see that from Jimmy Garoppolo throughout last season. If you watch Jimmy Garoppolo's press conferences last year, he contradicted Kyle Shanahan repeatedly, over and over again. You know why? Because he didn't give a crap anymore. He wasn't a long-term guy. He was there because the 49ers wouldn't let him go. There weren't any other teams. He wasn't healthy, so he kind of got stuck in San Francisco, and that's how he felt. And then he went out and did his thing, and now he's with Vegas, and I think he's going to be okay. In terms of the other one from Jeremy, where he says Lance wanted out, and that's fine. Trey Lance wanted out. Trey Lance got out. Trey Lance is now a Dallas Cowboy, and he is going to ride the bench in Dallas just like he was going to ride the bench in San Francisco. And beyond that, we'll see what happens to his career in San Francisco. I thought that Guy Haberman put it tremendously on Twitter. Basically, he wanted out. He got his wish. Now he's going to a place where, he's got a bigger spotlight on him. In Dallas, there's a bigger spotlight than even in San Francisco. He's got an owner who makes crazy moves, who hasn't been successful, and he's going to be behind Dak Prescott. You can see the whole media circus that was in San Francisco for these last 2 years moving. They picked up their tent. They've left San Francisco. They've left Santa Clara, and that media tent, that media circus tent, has been plopped down in Frisco, Texas, at the Dallas Cowboys facility. Trey Lance, love him. I think Trey Lance is in a situation where it's a fresh start. That is tremendous. But as far as being in a better spot than he was in San Francisco, I need somebody to explain to me how we spent 2 seasons with people screaming that Trey Lance needs to play. I need somebody to explain to me how being in Dallas and sitting on the bench behind Dak Prescott is any better. How he's going to be developed any better, because the whole argument with Trey Lance in San Francisco was that Trey Lance needed to be developed by playing, not sitting on the bench. And now he's in Dallas, where guess what? He is going to sit on the bench. He might be the backup eventually. He might be. But still, he will sit on the bench unless an injury occurs ahead of him, just like in 2021 in San Francisco. Do I sound mad? Bam, bam. I'm just kind of, here's the thing. I'm talking about it because it's Jeremy's fault. Jeremy brought up Trey Lance. He got me on this whole train. Some of you guys over there did. I'm not mad. I'm tired of talking about it because I think that we've talked about this and we keep saying the same thing. And I can only say the same thing so much before I get tired. It's kind of like when I used to talk to my ex-wife and I would tell her the same thing 15 times. And then you kind of get a little frustrated because they're not listening to what you're saying. And when things go wrong, they're still trying to figure out why things went wrong. And it's like, well, I explained to you that we needed to do this and this and this, or this was the process, or this is what was happening. And that's the thing. We've heard it all so many times with Trey Lance. And I want to get off of Trey Lance because that's not what this was supposed to be about. This was supposed to be about the 49ers roster and their practice squad. So looking at the roster, were some roster moves today as well. Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers got Danny Gray. They placed Danny Gray on injured reserve. So Danny Gray to IR. Also, Robert Beal Jr., defensive end, he is headed to IR as well. Both Gray and Robert Beal Jr. Have, because they made that initial 53-man roster, do have the ability to be put on designation to return. So Danny Gray and Robert Beal Jr., their season's not over with. They both made the 53. Now they're on IR. Ray McLeod, there's been some question on that one as well. But as far as what we heard today from Kyle Shanahan, that hasn't been decided as of yet. There's a possibility there, but it sounds like maybe McLeod's going to be able to come back a little bit sooner than expected. So I think the 49ers were okay with losing Danny Gray for 8 weeks, but they don't want to do that with Ray McLeod. So it sounds to me like these are the moves so far. And then because with Gray and Beal Jr. moving to IR, that opened up 2 roster spots. Those roster spots were filled by Kerry Hyder and Austin Bryant. The 2 veterans fill both of those spots, and I really like this. And I mentioned this yesterday when I did my initial 53-man roster breakdown. Kerry Hyder is a nice player because he's a defensive end, but he can slide inside. So he's kind of like your Charles Omenihu type of player, right? Inside outside versatility. Same thing with Jordan Willis last year. So you're getting that to an extent with Kerry Hyder. You also get that to an extent with Clelin Ferrell. As far as Austin Bryant's a guy who's healthy, and you look at Austin Bryant during the time that he's been healthy, he's been a very good player in the NFL. When he's been healthy, he had four and a half sacks the 1 year that he was mostly healthy. And you watch him on the practice field in Santa Clara, he is explosive off the ball, shows some moves in the pass rushing area. The other thing that he does really well is Austin Bryant is a good run defender as well. He does a good job of setting the edge in that run game. So good things there, both sides with Austin Bryant. There's a question over here. Also want to hit this before I check out. And it's regarding the quarterback. It is regarding Brock Purdy's arm. I'm missing it right now. I don't see it. There was a question about that arm, and it was asked today. Here it is. Frank A says, Jack, is Brock's arm sore? The 49ers didn't say it's sore. What the 49ers said was that He's on a throwing pitch count throughout training camp. That was at 700 throws a week. Now, right this week, they've tapered that down to about 350. They want to kind of make it a little bit lighter load for him, and then they'll ramp that up again next week. 750, 700, 350. Here's part of it is that the number of practices is going down, so they can make that excuse. The other thing too is this is a thing because of what happened at practice on Monday, where some of the reporters noted that he stepped out and wasn't taking all of his turns during the work with the wide receivers in that open portion of the practice. Now that training camp is beyond us, the media, we only get to watch the first 4 sessions, and then we get kicked out. So basically, all we get to see are the warm-ups and the work that they do with the wide receivers, and then it's get out of here. We'll see you after practice. So when you look at it from that standpoint, what I will tell you is I reported back on August 8th at training camp. I noticed that Brock Purdy was not making all of the throws that the other quarterbacks were. He would make a throw to the receivers, and the next time his turn would come up, he'd hang back and he'd let the other quarterback take it. I put that in my practice report afterwards. If you go to 49ers.pressdemocrat.com, go back to August 8th and look at that practice report from that day, you'll notice that the first thing that I wrote about Brock Purdy that day was how he did not take the full workload. That's what happened on Monday. It's not anything new that's happened with Brock Purdy. I just want to make sure that that's clear. It's not a new development. I reported it on the 8th of August. I reported it about a week later as well that this was still happening. It was right before they went out to Vegas. When we were in Vegas, it wasn't something that we were able to keep an eye on because in Vegas, they were getting that work done before the media was allowed to enter the facility for practice. So it was a little bit different. And we didn't see that in Vegas. Upon the return to Santa Clara, guess what? Again, you would see Brock Purdy not making all the throws as though the receiver. So it was reported the other day on Monday isn't a new development. It's been ongoing. The number of throws and that kind of thing may have changed, what have you, but this isn't a new development for Brock Purdy. So I just want to make sure that that's out there, that you understand that, because I do think it is a question. Shane says, mostly agree, especially about Lance. Sometimes disagree. Always respect the opinion, though. Appreciate it. Would love to brought Manning back. Hey, Shane, I appreciate the super chat. I'm going to tell you this. I always respect your opinion. I appreciate the back and forth. I appreciate the fact that you check out the channel all the time. You're one of those good dudes. I know we're supposed to meet up and when we're out in Pittsburgh and what have you. So, hey, just because I disagree and I tell you that I disagree or I explain why I disagree, what have you, it doesn't mean that I think you're off the mark. You're a fan. You're a faithful. You're allowed to have your opinions. I respect those. And as long as you understand that I'm not always going to agree with them and we can have that back and forth. Remember, you can tell me that I'm full of shit too. If you feel like I am, if you totally disagree with me on something, I don't care. Let me have it, because you know what? If I'm going to tell you that I think you're full of beans, then I should be, strong enough to understand that that's going to come back my way every once in a while, right? So we're all good, and I really appreciate the super chat there. Jeremy says, how many touchdowns does Purdy throw this season? 435. No. You look through last year, and I think if you take the touchdown percentage from last year and you kind of keep that the same, and you figure in he's going to throw about 515 passes, 520 passes, I think the number is right around like somewhere in like the 35 to 40 range for Brock Purdy. Do I think that's high? I think that number is going to come down a little bit. I don't think we're going to see Brock Purdy with that same touchdown percentage as a year ago, Jeremy. But I would say that if it comes to touchdowns, I'm going to put the over-under with Brock Purdy at 30 touchdowns. 30 touchdowns is the over-under for Brock Purdy this year if you had to go either way. I'd probably go with the over on that. The difference with Brock is, I think partly why you saw the higher touchdown percentage with him, is he's just really good in the red zone. That's one of the biggest things with Brock Purdy. That's where he separates himself from the other quarterbacks. That's where he separated himself from Jimmy Garoppolo. That's definitely where he separates himself from Trey Lance. Is he's just he's really good down in that red zone, and not only with the ability to throw, but also with his legs. So, I think that's the difference. JG one says 33 touchdowns. That's a good number. I think 33 is right in that way. 14 Ace Window says 37. So that's a good one as well. Um, I think 37 might be a little high, but if he's doing really good down in the red zone, if he's hitting down there like he did last year, then I think they're going to be fine. Lee Ving says, "Are you at an In-N-Out?" No, I'm at a Starbucks. I'm at a Starbucks sitting by the drive-through. Um, and this is another one too. Shane says, "What does hold the team accountable mean?" And this is content creator fodder right here. We need to hold the team accountable. What are we going to hold the team accountable for? Winning? I mean, yeah, you can hold the team accountable for blowing the Trey Lance pick, absolutely. But you hold the team accountable by pointing out that it was a bad pick. But at the same time, they're in their NFC championship game both years. The quarterback that they picked up last year in the at seventh, 262 overall. If he plays the same level that he played last season, if he continues that on, it doesn't matter. He's going to be a Pro Bowler. He'll be the first Pro Bowler for the 49ers since Jeff Garcia. If Brock Purdy continues to play at the level he played last year, and the 49ers are able to win the Super Bowl, as Steve Mariucci says, I think Brock Purdy is going to be in the conversation for the NFL MVP, especially the offensive MVP, because his numbers are going to be there. So we'll see what direction it goes, but it's holding the team accountable. This is just a matter of, here's what holding the team accountable means. Holding the team accountable as a content creator or what have you, the keep it real guys, the guys that are keeping it real, holding the feet to the fire of that team, what they're doing is they are making it so that they can just continually knock the team and people are going to buy into it. One of the biggest things that I will say is that I know that negativity sells. How do I know that negativity sells? Here's an example. Yesterday, I did a video about Nick Bosa and the possibility that he's going to be traded based off of what I even said in my video was a bogus rumor from a Redditor. And I even in there, I explained why it was bogus. I spent most of the 8 minutes talking about why it was bogus. That thing has over 8,000 views. This morning, I talked about how he is going to likely be signed prior to the start of the regular season and be able to play against Pittsburgh. That one's at about 2,500, 3,000, somewhere in that range. I don't expect it to get even anywhere close. So, watch who you're going to watch, listen to who you're going to listen to. I don't want, I'm not going to tell you not to listen to it, but, I'm not stupid. I know that negativity sells. That's just not my style. My style is that I am going to come up here and I am going to give you an honest opinion of what's happening with the team. When I disagree with something that somebody has said, I'm going to tell you. If I hear a report on something I disagree with, I'm going to tell you. This Brock Purdy one is a perfect example. People that I really expect in that media room were the ones who were talking about it. But I felt like I needed to explain that this has been going on for a while. So hopefully they're not, they don't feel like it's a big problem. So we'll see. Really quick, we'll wrap up with this. Jeremy Price, $4.99. How's Talanoa? No update on him. We know that he has a Baker's cyst, but there's no update from the team right now on Talanoa Hufanga. We'll see how this progresses. I think we'll get a better idea next week. Get through this week of practice. There'll be another practice tomorrow early, 11:15 tomorrow morning. Then they're going to be off, I think, until the start of preparation week for going out to Pittsburgh. So we're right around the corner. Don't have an update. I apologize, Jeremy. Make sure tomorrow we're down the road. If you have a question, just hit me up, put a star on it or something, and I'll give you that one back because that's a tough super chat because I just don't have an update because there was nothing to really report on Talanoa Hufanga. He's coming along, and I like this one. This is the best one. We got to end on this one. Jeremy with another one. Jeremy just keeps hitting it with the super chats today. Makes me want to keep talking. He says, Jack ain't a sellout, and that's right. I ain't a sellout. There's no reason. I didn't get into this to be a sellout. I got into it hoping that I was going to be able to do this, and make it my living. I'm working that way towards that direction. But we'll see how it all works out. But I'm not selling out for clicks. I'm just telling the truth and telling it like it is. and that's the direction that I'm always going to go. Fish and chips. It's 29 years, Jack. It's too long. Hey, I agree with you on that. I do think that it's been too long. The good thing is that I think right now we are in a spot where the 49ers, I think we're in a really good spot with the 49ers. I think it's about as close to what we had in the 90s and early 2000s as we've got. But now here's the thing. They need to win the Super Bowl. And I think the 49ers themselves, I think Kyle Shanahan, I think John Lynch, I think they feel the pressure and the need to win a Super Bowl this year. So there it is. Keep it locked in here. Hey, I'm going to go ahead. I got to head out. I've got a football game to get to. I've got my son's first freshman football game. It's going to be kicking off in about an hour and a half. I cannot wait to watch that. He's a backup quarterback. He's a defensive lineman as well. I'm looking forward to seeing how he plays in his first game. It's going to be a tough one. They're playing against a school that's usually really good. So that's coming up. But hey, before I leave, I want to ask everybody, do me a favor, hit that like button before you leave. After you hit the like button, please subscribe to the channel if you're watching and you're not already subscribed, and then end that up with making sure that you hit the notification button. You want to make sure that you have your notifications on so that you get notified every time we go live, anytime that something gets uploaded, so you don't miss any of the updates right here on Inside the Farmers with Jack Hammer. Have a great rest of your night, everybody. Keep it locked in here, and we'll be talking with you soon. Take care.